Good evening, everyone. So here we are with the leftover portions of science and technology. So for the next half an hour or maybe 40 minutes or so, we'll first have a discussion on the leftover topics of science and tech, and then you shall move towards your environment and ecology classes. Right. So begin with, we had understood that there are basic problems. There are four basic problems that we are facing when it comes to IPRs in India. And these four basic problems, the first of those problems is compulsory license. Compulsory license. Now understand what we mean by compulsory license and how is it important for us. So compulsory license is something that can be given by the government. It's a kind of license that can be given by the government or any government of the world in case of an emergency. Now, what this emergency is, it is up to that nation to decide. It is up to the government of that nation to decide what they want to decide as an emergency. So, anything that has been defined as an emergency, there are compulsory licenses that can be given in that case. All right. So, if there is any emergency, if there is any emergency condition, so that's why this compulsory license has been permitted under the TRIPS agreement, so that if there is any national emergency or any other circumstances of extreme urgency, then in that case we see that this compulsory license can be given by the government. Now understand how. Let me just take you with a very simple example. Example is vaccines. We saw that COVID-19 vaccines were priced at somewhere around 300 to 700, 800 rupees, correct? And many of the vaccines were also being given by the government for free, but maximum the cap was 780 rupees and not beyond that. Now, because vaccines are something that can be patented, let's say there was a scenario where one company, suppose that there was only one company in the world who was able to make this COVID-19 vaccine. And then the company decides that we want to sell it at a very high price. Suppose that they want to sell it for rupees 1 lakh per dose. And you have to take two doses. So you have to spend 2 lakh rupees just to get this COVID-19 vaccine. Now, would you take it? Probably many of us would want that in some way we should be able to get it. If we have that money, fine, we'll get that money and get this vaccine. If I don't have that money, I'll try to take a loan, I'll try to borrow this money from somewhere. But in one way or the other, I'll try to ensure that somehow I get this money. I know that for a majority of our population, for a very huge part of our population, 2 lakh is impossible to even think of, but anyone who can manage somehow will try to manage this money, correct? So now this company is going to gain its money, its share, because it is getting tremendous amount of money out of every compulsory license comes. It's not the political or financial emergency that you read about in Indian polity. It's not about that. It's just that we can say that, look, this is an emergency condition for this country, so we will start giving compulsory license. So under these kind of practices, what can be done by the government is that, because let's say that company which has come out with the vaccine would have taken the patent in India, so they have given the complete public disclosure to the government. So government can just give this information to one of the Indian companies and say that, okay, you start making the vaccine. And then this company starts making the vaccine and then starts selling it for a very cheap price, because the government would have mandated that you cannot earn profit from it. You are making it only because we want something to be done for the people of India. So this is how compulsory license becomes useful, that in these kind of cases it is up to a country. If they want, they can use this compulsory license. So that's why compulsory license becomes very, very crucial in this aspect, because it will provide the owner of the patent or copyright licenses to use of these rights against a payment. So payment will be made by the government, and then they would pay some amount, that okay, fine, you are going to lose a lot, so we are giving you some money, but we are giving compulsory license to some other company for this. All right. So this is basically what will happen in terms of compulsory licenses. Now what happens is that in this case of compulsory license, we see that many of the foreign companies, many of the pharmaceutical companies from abroad, they have actually said that India uses this compulsory license in a manner that is very disadvantageous for this company or all these companies based out of Europe or US. And this is where the case related to generic drugs comes in. Generic drugs. Now, what do we mean by generic drugs, first of all? The meaning of generic drugs is that that this is a drug that has the same formulation, all the same ingredients as the patented medicine, but has not been made by the patented company. It has been made by somebody else. So it has all the ingredients, all the ingredients and formulations. These are same as the patented drug, as the patented drug, but made by some other company. So these will be called as these will be called as generic drugs. So the drug that is not being made by the original patented company, but some other company is making it. Now, what happens with generic drugs is that generic drugs will drastically bring down the cost of these drugs, and especially when it comes to life-saving drugs, it has been kind of a practice in India that the government of India gives compulsory licenses to other companies so that they can start making these medicines for very cheap. And that's why India is said to be one of the cheapest nations when it comes to the medicinal cost or to the treatment cost or the medicine or drug costs. So that's why we see that India also becomes a destination for many people to come if they are getting treated for something, because in India overall healthcare becomes very cheap in this matter. If you compare the medicine prices that you have in India as compared to Europe or in the US, you'll find that in these areas the healthcare is very costly, but in India that's not the case. So that's why we see that these generic drugs, they become very very crucial because they would make the medicines affordable, that for the people who cannot who do not have so much of money that they can spend on the original patented drugs, they can get the generic drugs. Now generic drugs do not mean that these are duplicate drugs. Just understand this, that these are not duplicate drugs. They have the same formulation, they have the same set of ingredients, they have used the exactly same process. So everything is exactly the same, just that it hasn't been made by the patented company. And this is done by the government to ensure that they can bring down the cost of the medicine. And many times that's why when a company, a foreign company, a pharmaceutical company, when they enter the Indian market, they would keep the prices low. They would keep the prices low because they know that if they keep the prices high, the government of India is going to bring down the prices in one way or the other. So that's why they will choose to keep their prices low so that they are competitive in the market and they do not face the challenge from the generic drugs. So this is basically the case of generic drugs. And in one regard, we see that the case of generic drugs becomes very, very crucial. And this is where we look at the medication against AIDS. Now, in the case of AIDS, what was seen is that initially the medicine that was brought in, there was one company that brought in the first medicine against AIDS. Now, it will not solve the problem, it will not treat AIDS, just that it will help people live with AIDS. That's the only thing that would happen, that people will be able to live with AIDS and survive with AIDS for longer time, and they can live with dignity. So that was the whole purpose. The problem was that this drug costed $8,000 per annum. $8,000 per annum. Now, AIDS largely was a disease that was infecting people from the lower strata of the society. And it was impossible for these people to even think that they'll be able to manage this much amount of money with regard to this drug. So, unfortunately, it would not be possible for them to buy this drug. But then we see that due to the interventions of government of India back then, and we are talking about early 2000s, at the time of Atal Bihari Vajpayee government, this is when Cipla came forward, an Indian company Cipla, where Dr. Yusuf Hamid was the head of Cipla back then, and he came forward with a plan, a proposal to the government of India, and he said that if you let us mass produce this drug, if you let us mass produce this drug, we can bring down the cost to as low as $1 a day. $1 a day, meaning $365 in a year. So something that would have costed $8,000 per annum would now cost only cost $365 an annum. So this is where it now starts becoming feasible for a lot of people to get access to this drug. And this is what the government of India did, that they allowed Cipla to go forward and start mass producing this drug. And not only these drugs were distributed in India, but at the same time these were distributed for free to other countries as well. We also distributed it to many of the African countries like South Africa, Nigeria, etc. Similarly, it was also given to other countries of South Asia like Bangladesh, Pakistan, Sri Lanka. So in this manner we ensured that this epidemic of AIDS, which was about to become a pandemic, was contained. We launched a lot of programs, we did all this and ensured that we actually are bringing this cost down, and we ensured that this AIDS does not spread in a manner that it was spreading. So that's why there are case studies on this, that how India single-handedly ensured that AIDS does not become a pandemic. And that's why it was commendable job, although there were a lot of international pressure on India that India should not do all that, but India went forward and did it anyway. Now, another problem has been about data exclusivity. Now, data exclusivity is something where there all many of the foreign investors and multinational companies have alleged that Indian laws do not protect against the unfair commercial use of test data and other data that was submitted to the government. Now, what they are claiming is that even though their products are not being copied, it's not that the products are being copied and somebody is making the same thing, but their test results are available. What they did, how they did, what was the research behind it, all those data are leaked. And because that data is not safe, some other company can use that data to manufacture a similar product. So in that case, whatever competitive edge that they had, they lose all that competitive edge. That is the allegations that they have against India. So that's why many of these companies, and largely again these are pharmaceutical and agrochemical companies, they have alleged that India does not have protection, very good protection for data, and that's why there should be data exclusivity laws in India so that their data can be protected better. So that's why they have demanded that there should be data exclusivity laws, that it should not be that their data gets leaked easily, because otherwise they don't want to enter the Indian market. But the problem is that they cannot not enter the Indian market, because they know how big a market India is. So that's why they want to come into the Indian market, but they also at the same time want to have all this protection. Now, one more problem with regard to IPRs in India is enforcement of the Copyrights Act. Now, one example being what I keep using in every single subject or every single topic, memes. Now, in case of memes, what's happening? That a lot of these pictures that are being used by memers, let's say, all these memes, all these images, they belong to somebody, but they are being rampantly used. So, for example, even this image, if you follow Instagram, if you follow a lot of meme pages, etc., you might have come across this particular meme template a lot of times, correct? So, this is basically what's happening, that the internet does not care about the copyright laws, and hence these kind of images are just floating around without having proper permission. So overall, what happens in this particular scenario is that enforcement of Copyrights Act in one way or the other has been very weak. In case of books, it has been weak. 10 years back, 15 years back, you'll see that the movies will be available very easily. That if a movie is about to be released every Friday, oh, today is a Friday. So before the Friday release of the movie, probably Thursday night, you will have the CD or the DVD of the movie already available for maybe 10 rupees. So then you don't need to go to the theater and go and watch the movie. You can watch the movie at your home, and just by using just 10 rupees, and that's it. So these used to happen, but a lot of we worked a lot in curbing all that. But in case of books, we see that still it's a problem. You go around, I mean, especially let's say if you are living in Delhi, you might have seen that you wherever you go, you will find that on the roadsides there will be people who are selling duplicate books, pirated books. And if I can see it, you can see it. I'm sure that enforcement agencies can also see it. But unfortunately, not a lot is being done. So that's why enforcement, that the copyright acts are there at their place, but the enforcement is not that great. So that also has been one of the issues altogether when it comes to the national policy, or in general when it comes to IPRs in India. Now, there are a couple of questions that have come from here, and through the question there is one more topic that I want to take up. This is the first question. With reference to national intellectual property rights policy, consider the following statements. First, it reiterates India's commitment to the Doha Development Agenda and TRIPS agreement. Now, this is correct. If you look at the very first line that we had, that the government had written, if you go to the PIB article of the time when the national policy on IPR was brought in, this was the first line that they started with, that we are committed to the Doha Development Agenda and the TRIPS agreement, and in accordance with all these agendas that we have in agreements, we are bringing in our national policy on IPR. So that's why this is a correct statement. And Department of Industrial Policy and Promotion, that is DIPP, is the nodal agency. Now this is also correct. Now the thing is that now the name has changed. It has become DPIIT. It has become DPIIT, Department for Promotion of Industries and International Trade. So that is how the name has changed. Otherwise, the name used to be DIPP. Now it has become DPIIT. So these two statements, that's why in the context of the question, are correct. So this was a kind of current affairs question, because national policy had come in 2016, and this is when they had asked this question. I've not launched the poll because I've not discussed anything with regard to this. So it would be anyway for you also, it will be just like taking a guess. Now, through this question, there is one very, very important aspect that I want to discuss with you, and this is section 3D. Section 3D of Indian Patents Act. Indian Patents Act. All right. Section 3D of Indian Patents Act. Now, in this particular scenario, this section 3, rather section 3, is about what cannot be patented in India. All right. Section 3 is about what can't be patented in India. So that's why there are many subsections here. Section 3A, 3B, 3C, 3D, up to it goes like 3M and etc. So now, according to this act, or this section of the Indian Patents Act, these are the things that have been written that what cannot be patented. For example, something that is natural cannot be patented. Something which is biological result cannot be patented. So there are a number of things, and in this there is one thing about if there are just small variations that you have made, you cannot just go and get it patented. That, if you remember, we discussed yesterday something, and what we discussed as patent evergreening. Remember this word? We discussed this word yesterday, patent evergreening. So what is patent evergreening? When any company or any organization, they just make a very small change, slight change somewhere, and they say that now we should again get a patent. So what section 3D does is, section 3D tries to prevent, section 3D basically tries to prevent, it prevents patent evergreening. That here we have said that if you have made a change which brings in significant change or significant improvement in the product or the process, then only you are allowed to get a renewal over patent. Otherwise we will not renew the patent. Now this is where a lot of pharmaceutical companies don't want this to happen, because in the West they are used to this. In the West they are used to making slight changes and getting a new patent. Now this is, just understand this, that's why there is a big difference between the patent laws or the intellectual property laws that we have in India or other eastern countries like even China or Japan as well. You'll see that the East has a very different approach compared to the West, where we have seen that a lot of our policies and laws and acts, whether India, China, Japan, etc., all other Asian countries like Korea, etc., also, you'll find that a lot of these laws are people centric. They have been made in a manner that they should help the people of India. They should help the Indian society in one way or the other. But when you look at the Western laws have been made in a manner that it always is going to support these companies. So the people don't get any support there. The people can do whatever they want. They can file any case that they want, but you will see that in these cases the companies come out to be very strong, whereas in cases when it comes to India or other Asian countries, you'll find that the people of the countries, they come out to be very strong. So that's why these companies don't want that something like section 3D should be there at all, because that simply means that they are going to lose money at the behest of people of that country gaining something. So if you look at the three statements, the first statement is, according to the Indian Patents Act, a biological process to create a seed can be patented in India. This is wrong. Biological process cannot be used. If you have used genetic engineering, if you have used genetic engineering, then it is okay. Then you can file for patent. But it is just a biological process, a natural process, you can't. So many a times, for example, if you look at statement number 3, plant varieties are not eligible to be patented in India. This is correct. In the US, you can. Suppose that you just went on a hiking in the US and you came across a plant that you do not recognize, and you go and file for a patent. And incidentally, let's say nobody had patented and there was no patent in the name of that plant, then you can get the patent, that plant patented in your name if you want. In India, you can't do that. It's not, you cannot just walk around and find a plant and name it after you. You can't do that. So in India, they are not eligible to be patented in India, whereas in the US and European countries, they actually are allowed to be patented. Then second statement, in India, there is no intellectual property appellate board. It's very unlikely that there will be no appellate board. So this is wrong. There is an appellate board. It was, I think, constituted back in 2003, if I'm not wrong. So has been there for more than 20 years now. So that's why the correct answer will be 3 only. So that's why we have to understand all this, that they become very, very crucial from the perspective that, for example, when it comes to this, there is the section 3J that excludes any plant or animal variety to be patented in the country, and anything that is natural, it cannot be patented anyway. So that is what, these are the some of the controversies that we have. And then the last topic of this chapter, traditional knowledge digital library. Now, this basically is where we have made a digital library that contains all the traditional knowledge of the country. Now, first thing is, why was this required? You'll come across a lot of cases where you'll find that something which is very naturally known in India, something that has been traditionally a part of Indian culture and heritage, was being patented somewhere in Europe, somewhere in the US, etc. For example, medicinal properties of turmeric, patented in the US. Now, we know that we have been using turmeric as something that has medicinal properties. So, but it was patented in the US. Basmati rice got patented in in Europe. Yoga postures got, some of the yoga postures got patented in Europe. So just imagine that these things that we just think of it as a traditional part of our culture, they were getting patented in other parts of the world. So this is where it was felt that there was a need that all these things should be safeguarded. Everything that is a part of the traditional knowledge of India, they have to be safeguarded. And this is where we came out with the idea of traditional knowledge digital library, where this, so that's why there were a lot of wrongfully granted, there were a lot of patents that were wrongfully granted to traditional knowledge, and this was especially happening in the West. So turmeric, neem, basmati, etc., they all are examples where this happened. Now, in this particular scenario, what we see is that this is where a lot of this problem also arise from, that when you look at India, we understand that we are a diverse country. And that's why there are so many cultures, there are so many languages. You move 100 kilometers from one place to another, the language changes in this country. And even if, let's say, you are saying that, okay, the same language, let's say if Hindi is being spoken, even the kind of Hindi people speak, that changes in 100 kilometers. You'll find that two people coming from two different regions, they are not even able to understand each other's Hindi because of the way it is spoken, because of the dialect that they have. So that's why we know that the languages change, the dialects change very quickly in this country. And that's why it was felt a need that because of this also it becomes a challenge that we are not able to safeguard our traditional knowledge. So what was decided, and this is where CSIR, that is Council of Scientific and Industrial Research, and Department of Ayush, which has now become Ministry of Ayush. So now these two came together and they developed a digital library, a public digital library, where all this information that we have in whatever language we have, whichever language, any part of the country, they all would be now translated into five international languages. What five international languages? English, French, Spanish, German, and Japanese. So these five languages were chosen, that everything will be translated to these five languages and it will be available as a public library, a digital public library, so that everyone can see and nobody can get anything patented. The traditional knowledge can no longer be patented by Western companies. And even if the uh, let's say if any advantage has to go, the advantage has to go to the people of this country, or maybe the culture from where we are borrowing all these traditional knowledge. So that's why with this thought process we basically started this traditional knowledge digital library, and that's why it starts providing a defensive protection to the rich traditional knowledge of India. So that's why this becomes very, very crucial in the context of how to safeguard our own traditional knowledge. And we saw that in the last 10-15 years, we have been fighting a lot of these cases. In 2008, this is where we see that in the parliament also a lot of debates started happening that India needs to do something about this. And we see that by 2014, we finally built this traditional knowledge digital library. So this is about this chapter. Now coming to the main questions that have come from this chapter. If you see, there are two questions that have come from the same last topic that we discussed, traditional knowledge, digital library. There are two questions that have come from here. So one is, how is India protecting traditional knowledge of medicine from patenting by pharmaceutical companies? So we basically have to write about traditional knowledge digital library and everything, every effort that we are making through this library to safeguard it. And then the second question is about the pros and cons of making this database publicly available under open source library. That what are the positives and what are the negatives. So positive side, we know that how we can help Indian society. Maybe we'll figure out new formulations, we'll be able to formalize a lot of this knowledge, and also help from counterfeiting of this knowledge, or also wrong patenting of this knowledge. So there are all these positives. Plus at the same time there are certain issues as well, that because this knowledge is publicly available, we cannot stop this from being used without patents, and maybe a lot of things with half baked knowledge will be used, and there are certain issues of theft, etc., that can happen. Now the third question is a pretty straightforward question. In a globalized world, intellectual property rights assume significance and are a source of litigation, broadly distinguished between the terms copyrights, patents, and trade secrets. So these are the three terms, and they simply have asked you to distinguish between these three terms. So we already have understood and discussed about what these are. So you have to differentiate. Either you can make columns and write these answers, or if you want, you can write it under separate headings also. So anything that suits you. If you know very well, making column is the best way out. If you think that you do not really have all the points ready with you, then in that case, writing under subheadings will be a safer choice, because then you don't make it apparent that you don't know exact word to word differences. So that's why. But a straightforward question where, but still in this question also you should give an introduction to IPRs. You should give an introduction to what IPRs are, because of this one line, because they have talked about intellectual property rights and why they are important. So that's why you should also write something about it before you start distinguishing. And if let's say the question was directly about broadly distinguishing, then in that case I wouldn't have asked you to write this introduction. But since they have done some extra work, you should also do some extra work in doing so. All right. So this is it. This was the last chapter that we had. Now, before we end the session, I just want to also discuss some of the questions that have come in your prelims examination last year, just to give you a habit of what kind of questions have come, not to solve these questions, not to know the answers of this question, but to understand the pattern of these questions. So overall, when it comes to these questions, if you look at the first question, it's a pretty vague question, I would say, and something that you can take an intelligent guess about. So if you look at this question, all these three statements say some microorganisms, some microorganisms, some microorganisms. So some can grow in the environments with temperature above boiling point, meaning above 100 degrees Celsius. Is it possible? Yes, it is possible. There are microorganisms that grow even near volcano vents. So yes, it is possible. Similarly, some microorganisms can grow in environments with temperature below freezing point. Yes, they can. Now that we have found the zombie virus also, so we know that it is also possible. Some microorganisms can grow in highly acidic environment with pH below 3. Is that possible? Even that is possible. In your stomach itself, where you have hydrochloric acid with pH less than 3, yet there are microorganisms, bacteria that can survive there. So yes, it is also possible. So I'm saying that even if you don't know whether it's possible or not, some is a keyword for you. That if you had to take an intelligent guess, some is a keyword for you. Then the next question, consider the following heavy industries. Green hydrogen is expected to play a significant role in decarbonizing how many of these industries? Now, last year, green hydrogen was in news because we came out with the green hydrogen mission. And in that context, there are two questions that were asked by UPSC. Now, this I've taken directly from PIB. This was in the PIB article that was published when the green hydrogen mission was announced by the government. So if you see all these industries, fertilizer, oil, and steel, all these are actually mentioned. Fertilizer, refining, meaning oil, and then iron and steel industry. Everything is mentioned, that everything green hydrogen. So that's why the correct answer will be all three. So straightforward question. Then Wolbachia method is sometimes talked about with reference to which of the following? Now, Wolbachia method is again something that has been in the news not only last year or this year, but at least for last 5-6 years. And because there have been a lot of discussions about using of Wolbachia method and how we can introduce this particular bacteria called as the Wolbachia, which will be able to control the multiplication of virus in a vector. And which vector? Specifically mosquitoes. So that's why the mosquito borne diseases like malaria, dengue, chikungunya, these can be controlled with the help of Wolbachia method, and has been in the news for at least for last 5-6 years, because many of the countries are adopting the Wolbachia method. So that's why controlling the viral diseases spread by mosquitoes. So again, something which is a repeated current affairs for at least last 5-6 years. So you can see that these kind of a lot of these articles you will be able to see on the internet. Then the next question is aerial metagenomics. It best refers to which of the following situations? Now, Aerial metagenomics. Now, this becomes a difficult question. This becomes a difficult question, and the context that it has been asked in is that the oldest DNA was found in Greenland, which is almost 2 million years ago. Now, this is where they basically talked about something called as environmental DNA. Environmental DNA, the DNA that you basically are collecting from the environment. So then in that case, it is called as environmental DNA. Now, when it comes to aerial metagenomics, now what is aerial? What is the meaning of aerial? Something related to air. That's why aerial. And metagenomics. Now, when we say metagenomics, the meaning of the term metagenomics is something where it is going beyond the genetics, or beyond, let's say, when I'm collecting samples, let's say from my skin or from a plant or from an animal, then in that case I'll say that this is where we are talking about genomics. But when it comes to metagenomics is when you are going outside the scope of an organism and then you are collecting the samples. So then in that case we say that it is basically called as metagenomics. So that's why metagenomics becomes very, very crucial when it comes to understanding of microorganisms or anything related to something that can be found from the environment, from water or soil samples. When we collect genes, then in that case it is metagenomics. So genes collected from water, soil, etc. So that's why this, and that's why the correct answer will be collecting DNA samples from air in habitat. So that's why when it comes to other things, they become wrong, because this is where we are doing it from the environment. So it would have been difficult. Then similarly, another question was microsatellite DNA used in the case of which of the following? Now, microsatellite DNA is in the context of, I would say, these two events, that the scientists have been able to finally fill the remaining 8% of human DNA, and then the Nobel Prize that was given for discovering concerning genes of extinct hominins and human evolution. And in this context, we basically talked about microsatellite or satellite DNA. I taken it as a part of current affairs lectures also last year, where I had talked about these satellite DNA. So this is basically where we are talking about the evolutionary relationships among species of fauna, where these microsatellite DNA, they are the DNA structures or bunch of DNA that keeps on repeating from one generation to another. So that's why we try to find this microsatellite DNA, because it helps us in understanding of where the generations are branching from, or the relationship that you have in the fauna between various different types of species, not only one single species. So that's why this is the context in which this question was asked. Then carbon fibers, this is something that we already had discussed in nanotechnology. So this was also asked last year. So correct answer, we had discussed that only the first one is correct, because they can be recycled. Then this question was asked, and this I would say is uh, a pretty difficult question, because they have picked it from something that we don't really discuss, because this is about function of accelerometer. That what does accelerometer do? So accelerometer basically, it detects change in velocity. Okay, it detects change in velocity. So that's what acceleration is. That acceleration means change in velocity. So any change in velocity will be detected by accelerometer. So first is detection of car crash or collision, so which deploys the airbag. So yes, this is where accelerometer is used, because it can detect the car crash, because there is a change in velocity when crashes happen. Then detection of accidental free fall of laptops towards the ground. So this also will, it is also something where you have a change in velocity. So now in that case also we say that this is also doable with accelerometer. Detection of the tilt of a smartphone, rotation of display between portrait and landscape mode. This is what change in direction. So change in velocity is either change in magnitude or change in direction. So that's why this also is doable. So all the three. So this I would say that is not an easy question, because it comes from something that we would not discuss. Then this question, largely Cepheids can be difficult to answer, but the other two, because nebula we already discussed, they are giant clouds of dust and gases in space. So obviously this is not correctly matched, and this is also not correctly matched. And then pulsars. Now, pulsars basically have been in the news constantly, and we keep discussing about pulsars in some kind of current affairs lectures here and there. So pulsars basically, these are neutron stars which are formed when massive stars run out of fuel and collapse. So that's why this basically is correctly matched, and pulsars can be formed actually at the death of the star. So that's why correct answer will be only one. That is, this is the only one that is correctly matched. Then which of the following countries has its own satellite navigation system? So we had discussed this in the context of navigation systems, that Japan has something called as quasi zenith. So Japan is the one that has its own satellite navigation system. So straightforward question. And then this question, again, we discussed about this in defense, that both of these statements given here are not correct. So correct answer here will be neither one nor two. And again, this is an easy question to answer, I would say, because they have come from largely static areas, and also from some areas which were very big part of current affairs. So this largely was in the context of Agni 5, because Agni 5 was test fired last year as well. Now, this question, as I told you that there were two questions that were asked from green hydrogen. Consider the following statements about green hydrogen. Can be used directly as a fuel for internal combustion engine. Yes, it is doable. So we can use it in internal combustion engine, and already we have been showcasing that it can be done. It can be blended with natural gas and used for fuel. Doable. We have discussed this. Remember, we discussed HCNG. So this is what HCNG is. It can be used as in the hydrogen fuel cell to run vehicles. Can be done. Have you seen our transport minister Nitin Gadkari? He went in a hydrogen run vehicle to the parliament also. So all the three possible, and that's why this is also doable. Now the last question that has come in the prelims examination. First, India, despite having uranium deposits, depends on coal for most of its electricity production. Is this correct statement? This is correct, because we know that almost 60% of our electricity comes from coal. So yes, India still depends on coal for most of its electricity production. Second statement, uranium enriched to the extent of at least 60% is required for the production of electricity. Is this correct? Is this statement correct? Quickly tell me. Is this statement correct? No, it is not correct. What did we discuss? Just 3 to 5%, right? Just 3 to 5%. So that's why this is wrong. So statement 1 is correct and statement 2 is wrong. So correct answer here will be C. So these were the questions that were asked in prelims last year. If you look at the mains examination, these are the three statements that were asked. First, introduce the concept of AI. So they have just asked about what AI is and how does AI help in clinical diagnosis, so in healthcare sector, and do you perceive any threat to privacy of individuals use of AI? We discussed about this, that how AI based systems can start collecting the data and they can use that data in a manner that is important for them, and they can use it to get their customers. So that is basically how you have to arrange this. Discuss the several ways in which microorganisms can help in meeting the current fuel shortage. So again, there are a lot of things that you can write here. So we, if you remember, there are certain things that we have discussed in the context of biotechnology, that how in biotechnology they can be useful in getting the fuel. So that is one thing. Similarly, they make the entire process less carbon dependent. Then at the same time, in biofuels they can be used. In the process of fermentation they can be used. Then there are microbial fuel cells where they can be used. So there are a lot of ways in which microorganisms can become very, very useful in the context of renewable energy altogether. So that is what you have to write. Then what is the main task of India's third moon mission, which could not be achieved in the earlier mission? So what is the main task? This is landing on the moon, or landing in the south pole, near the south pole of the moon. So last time we could not attend the landing, but this time we were successful. List the countries that have achieved this task. So list of countries, there are three that have done it: US, Russia, and China. So they are the ones, they have done it. Actually, it was Soviet Union that did it. So Soviet Union, in brackets you can write Russia to be safe. And so these were the easy parts of this question. Then the difficult part of the question. uh, Introduce the subsystems in the spacecraft launched. All right, the subsystems that have been launched in the spacecraft. So basically there is the lander and there is the rover. These are the major two subsystems that you have. So you have to write about that. And then comes the difficult part. Explain the role of virtual launch control center at Vikram Sarabhai Space Center contributed to successful launch at Sriharikota. Now this is where it can become difficult, because you might not know what it is. But can you take a guess? Virtual launch control center. What should be the role of virtual launch control center? What, according to you, what should be the role of virtual launch control center? Yeah, to control the launch. maneuver spacecraft during launch towards the moon. So basically it is virtual. The first word is what? First word is virtual. Meaning what? That this is where we are trying to remotely carry out these systems so that we can check the launches before, prior to the actual launch that we are doing. That virtually, remotely, we want to check out whether everything is working fine, so we can control this launch from Vikram Sarabhai Space Center. So you can take a guess, because there are 4 parts to this question. So it's not that a lot lies in this. If 3 parts are answered well, then at least 10 out of 15 marks are secured. Then the last 5 marks will actually will be on this particular part. So this was a difficult part, I would say. Other things, I would still say that these are easy to manage areas, and you would have enough material to write the answer upon based on anything that we have discussed, plus a lot of current affairs that we keep on discussing. Right. So this brings us to the end of everything that we had to discuss in science and technology. So if you have any questions, please let me know. And after this, we will switch to environment and ecology. So please go and start your environment and ecology classes after this. I'll ask Basavraj sir to start his class as we end this class here. So if you have any questions further, you can note my email ID. You can use this email ID and write to me if you have any doubts. rashesh.kumar@byju's.com. Can we mail it to you? Future? Of course, that's why I'm giving you my email ID. That if you have anything that you want to ask, you can always write to me. Even if you have an answer that you want to submit related to science and technology, you submit that. I'll check that answer also. So don't worry. All right. So this is it for these classes. Thank you very much for being here. Please take a small break and be ready for the next subject, that is environment and ecology. Thank you.